from text 33 of the Adi-lila of Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. Ore Mura Lokasuna Caitanya Mangala Caitanya Mahima Yate Janiva Sakala Ore Mura Lokasuna Caitanya Mangala Caitanya Mahima Yate Janive Sakala. Prabhus? All of you, Mudha, foolish, Loka, people, Suna, just hear, Caitanya Mangal, the book of this name, Caitanya, Lord Chaitanya's, Mahima, glories, Yate, in which, Janive, you will know. Sakala, all. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All fools, just read Caitanya Mangal. By reading this book, you can understand all the glories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Please repeat. All fools, just read Caitanya Mangal. By reading this book, you can understand all the glories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Purport. Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur's Chaitanya Bhagavat was originally entitled Caitanya Mangal. But when Srila Lochan Das Thakur later wrote another book named Caitanya Mangal, Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur changed the name of his own book, which is now therefore known as Chaitanya Bhagavat. The life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very elaborately described in Chaitanya Bhagavat. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has already informed us that in his Sri Caitanya Caritamrita, he has described whatever Vrindavan Das Thakur has not mentioned. This acceptance of Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami indicates his acceptance of the disciplic succession. A writer of transcendental literature never tries to surpass the previous acharyas. Okay, so we will speak a few points from this purport as to what's going on now, and then we can move forward if time permits, because the following few verses are very much related to today's verse. So we are all, like everybody reading the Caitanya Caritamrita, we are all being called fools by none other than the author of the Caitanya Caritamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj. And why he is doing this is because he is actually really very humble. And he is saying, why are you reading this book that I wrote? You should be reading this other book, which is called the Chaitanya Bhagavat. And this book was written by Vrindavan Das Thakur. So by reading this book, the Chaitanya Bhagavat, written by Vrindavan Das Thakur, you will understand everything about Lord Chaitanya and all the pastimes. So this is actually an indication of his humility, that by reading my book you won't really be able to get to the nectar. This is what Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj is saying as the author. But by reading this other book written by this other author, Vrindavan Das Thakur, which is now known as the Caitanya Bhagavat, by reading this book, then you will understand everything. So, some very interesting, okay, but before I go there, so we need to understand that this is, we all know that the Caitanya Caritamrita is actually the cream of the Vedic literatures. It's called the postgraduate study. And we know that cream is actually the Srimad Bhagavatam, but the Caitanya Caritamrita is the postgraduate study of Vedic studies. And this is what we are reading here now. So, and that it is just the humility and the gratitude of the author, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj, that he is saying that you won't really get anything by reading my book. So that is just his humility. We know that he is a wonderful, great, transcendental personality. And so some really interesting things about what is being mentioned today is that this book written by Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur, this book was originally called the Chaitanya Mangal. And then what happened is someone else, Sri Lochan Das Thakur, he later wrote another book and he also called it the Chaitanya Mangal. So then what happened is the great scholars in Vrindavan, they met, and Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur was there. So he changed the name of his book, and it was decided so, not just by him, but by all the other great scholars of Vrindavan at that time. And the book's title was changed to the Caitanya Bhagavat. So this, we might say, is why did this happen, especially when he was there first and he already had the same title. So the reasons given are that very interesting actually, that Vrindavan Das Thakur is actually just like Srila Vyasadeva, that he is described as the Vyasadeva. So we know that Srila Vyasadeva is the literally incarnation of Krishna. And this is what Vrindavan Thakur is described as. And he's actually described as being Srila Vyasadeva in Krishna's pastimes. And in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes he is Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur. So, and also because in the Bhagavatam we have all the stories about Krishna, in the Srimad Bhagavatam we have all the stories about Krishna. So in the same way, in the Caitanya Bhagavatam there are all the stories about Lord Chaitanya. And these stories are all about Lord Chaitanya's younger years, pastimes. So all about his pastimes at a younger age. Whereas the Caitanya Caritamrita, which we are now reading, has all the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, which is not mentioned in the Caitanya Bhagavat, because it is covering all the later years' pastimes. So, this is why the change of the name to be called Caitanya Bhagavat was very apt. So the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very elaborately described in Caitanya Bhagavat. And Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has already informed us that in his Caitanya Caritamrita he has described whatever Vrindavan Das Thakur has not mentioned. Then this acceptance of the Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami indicates his acceptance of the disciplic succession. That he is not, he never tries, a writer of transcendental literature never tries to surpass the previous acharyas. So he is not, it's a really important point, it's very subtle, and we can apply it in our lives, in our everyday practical lives. This point is, that this service has already been done, this book has already been written by Vrindavan Das Thakur, and it is covering all the early childhood pastimes and the young pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that now Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj, he is writing the Caitanya Caritamrita in his old age, and he is not minimizing at all. He's not minimizing at all. In fact, he's doing entirely the opposite. He's glorifying Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, and he's saying, he's actually calling us all fools, as we started off in the verse, that why are you even reading the Caitanya Caritamrita? But this is his humility. We need to understand this. He's just being really humble, and this humility of these Vaishnava acharyas is it's almost a rule. Almost a rule that all these great Vaishnavas, like the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan and all the other great Vaishnava scholars, that when they wrote, they never kind of mentioned their names in the literatures that I wrote this. They never kind of mentioned in the text and the purports that they were the author. So this is the point that we can extrapolate and use in our lives from this, is that whenever somebody else does a service, that we actually need to glorify that service instead of being envious and minimizing the service. Because when we minimize the service, all we are just showing our enviousness, basically, and we are wanting to become more prominent than whatever that other person has done. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam it is mentioned that this is envy. If somebody minimizes another service, and just thinks that his own service is the greatest, is the best, that he is doing the best, that this is envy. So instead, we need to learn from the great acharyas and imbibe their mood, try to follow in their footsteps, and their mood is glorifying everyone else. Their mood is glorifying and magnifying the service done by other devotees, and genuinely thinking oneself not as qualified, and not that their service isn't really that important, that somebody else could have come along and done their service. So this is the mood. Instead, it's quite prominent and quite obvious, and as practicing sadhakas, we have to try to imbibe this and do the best that we can in glorifying, in magnifying other devotees when they do services. So I will actually say a little bit about Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur, because it's very interesting. And he hasn't been mentioned prior to this here. So Srimad Vrindavan Das Thakur, do you know who he was? He was the son of Narayani, and Narayani was the niece of Srinivasacharya. So Narayani was only around 4 years old when Lord Chaitanya started giving her his prasadam remnants. So Lord Chaitanya would be very kind to Narayani and always offer her the remnants of his prasadam, and she would eat. And she, at one time, after eating his remnants, became completely ecstatic. She was only 4 years old, but she became completely ecstatic and had tears coming out of her eyes, and she was rolling around on the ground, and she was, saying the names of the Lord, saying Lord Chaitanya's names, and saying that she had achieved love of Godhead. So at this very young age, Narayani was blessed by Lord Chaitanya like this and given full Krishna prema, full love of Godhead. So later on, Narayani had a son called Vrindavan Das Thakur, and while he was still in the womb, his father passed away. So he is known only as Narayani's son. In the scriptures, his father's name isn't really mentioned much at all. So Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur, he grew up amongst these great personalities from right from the beginning. He grew up in Srivas Thakur's. He was his neighbor, and when Mahaprabhu, so going back to when Narayani was a little girl, when Mahaprabhu revealed his identity in the house of Srivas as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then Narayani was only a 4-year-old girl. So she began crying and saying, "Oh Krishna." As she laid on the ground in a trance of bliss, her eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed with divine love. So in the Caitanya Bhagavat, which is the book that is written by Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, it is mentioned, this is written by Vrindavan Das Thakur, that the golden mood Sri Gauranga revealed himself as the soul of all souls, and at that time he ordered Narayani to chant the name of Krishna. Although she was only 4 years old, she became mad with love of God, and crying, "Oh Krishna," she swooned in ecstasy. So Narayani would get whatever remnants the Lord might leave after eating, and the Lord would favor Srivas Thakur's niece Narayani by giving her the leftovers of food touched by his holy lips. So Sri Gauranga and Sri Nityananda, they were the very life and soul of Vrindavan Das Thakur. So Vrindavan Das Thakur, he played as a small boy growing up in the house of Srivas Thakur, and he was nourished and cared after just like a valuable gem. So when Lord Chaitanya left this world, Vrindavan Das Thakur was 20 years old. And then he took initiation from Lord Nityananda. So Vrindavan Das Thakur took initiation from Lord Nityananda. He was one of the last disciples of Lord Nityananda. He is Lord Nityananda's eternal servant. And he actually went with Sri Janava Devi, Lord Nityananda's wife, to Keturi. In Keturi, they had the first Gaur Purnima festival over there in Keturi. And this is described very nicely in the book, also the glorious life of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, because all these great associates, they were all there together. So, and here, in this book that we are reading today, which is the glorious Sri Caitanya Caritamrita, in this book, he is mentioned by Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj, and it is written by him that whoever reads the Caitanya Bhagavat, no grave misfortunes shall come upon him. Whoever knows the glories of Chaitanya and Nitai will then understand what Krishna Bhakti is and how it is and why. The book, the Caitanya Bhagavat, contains everything that is to be known. An atheist who hears this book will soon become a theist. No ordinary man can sing of God as Vrindavan Das Thakur has sung. The Lord himself has spoken through the Thakur's holy tongue. I bow down millions of times before the lotus feet of Sri Vrindavan Das, whose verses are so sweet that one who reads them shall be freed from this dark mortal earth. I bow 1,000,000 times before the place where he took birth. So this is how we can see what the mood of Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj is in relation to Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur and the Caitanya Bhagavat. He's saying that Vrindavan Das Thakur is Lord Nityananda's favorite devotee, and therefore he is the original Vyasadeva in describing the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So why, as I mentioned earlier, why is this name change from Chaitanya Mangal to Chaitanya Bhagavat actually really fitting, is because, as Srila Vyasadeva told Sri Krishna's pastimes in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas, in the same way Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur has described the Caitanya Lila in Chaitanya Bhagavat. Okay. So more glories of Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur is the humble heart of Krishna Das Kaviraj pours out more praises of Vrindavan Das Thakur, and he says, Hearing the Caitanya Bhagavat destroys all misfortune. By reading Caitanya Bhagavat, one will understand the glories of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. He will attain the highest perfection of knowledge, pure love of Krishna. Such a wonderful book could not be written by a human being. By compiling such a valuable book, he has delivered everyone from the cycle of birth and death. So, these are all the things mentioned by Sri Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj about Vrindavan Das Thakur and about his book, which I personally haven't read yet, but this is great incentive to actually get into it. Who's read the book already? Wow. Right. Thank you. So, right, we'll move on from text 33, and the other texts are very much connected to this text. So 34 is, as Vyasadeva has compiled all the pastimes of Lord Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Thakur Vrindavan Das has depicted the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. Thakur Vrindavan Das has composed Chaitanya Mangal. Hearing this book will annihilate all misfortune. By reading Caitanya Mangal, one can understand all the glories or truths of Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda and come to the ultimate conclusion of devotional service to Lord Krishna. So this is text 36, and it's got a purport which we will read quickly and discuss. Srimad Bhagavatam is the authoritative reference book from which to understand devotional service, but because it is very elaborate, few men can understand its purpose. Srimad Bhagavatam is the original commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, which is called Nyaya Prasthana. It was written to enable one to understand the absolute truth through infallible logic and argument, and therefore its natural commentary, Srimad Bhagavatam, is extremely elaborate. We know the Bhagavatam has 12 cantos, so the Bhagavatam is a large piece of work, and it is extremely elaborate. Professional reciters have created the impression that Srimad Bhagavatam deals only with Krishna's Rasa-lila, although this is far from the truth. Krishna's Rasa-lila is only described in the 10th canto out of the 12 cantos, and only in a few chapters, chapters 29 to 35. Professional reciters, they have in this way, professional reciters meaning people who do this for money, people who are not really devotees, who don't really have devotional service as the prime purpose, who are not really devoted to Krishna, but they are reciting this for money and making it into like a stage show almost. So professional reciters have created the impression they have in this way presented Krishna to the Western world as a great woman hunter, and therefore we sometimes have to deal with such misconceptions in preaching. Another difficulty in understanding Srimad Bhagavatam is that the professional reciters have introduced Bhagavad Saptah, or 7-day readings of the Bhagavatam. They want to finish Srimad Bhagavatam in a week, although it is so sublime that even one verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, if properly explained, cannot be completed in 3 months. Under these circumstances, it is a great aid for the common man to read Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur's Caitanya Bhagavat, for thus he can actually understand devotional service, Krishna, Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda. Srila Rupa Goswami has said, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Utpata Yaiva Kalpate. Devotional service of the Lord that ignores the authorized Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Puranas, Narada, Pancharatra, etc. is simply an unnecessary disturbance in society. Due to misunderstanding Srimad Bhagavatam, people are misled regarding the science of Krishna. However, by reading Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur's book, one can very easily understand this science. So, the importance of this book, the Caitanya Bhagavat, is again highlighted to us, and Personally, it's given me great incentive to make time to read the Caitanya Bhagavat, because it is said that even the Srimad Bhagavatam is so elaborate that people can get confused. But this book, the Caitanya Bhagavat, written by Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, that by reading this book, it establishes very firmly who Krishna is and who Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda are, and that it is actually then very easy to understand devotional service. And this verse by Rupa Goswami is mentioned that if one is doing devotional service but not basing it on what the scriptures are saying, not following exactly how it is described to be done in the scriptures, ignoring these scriptures, then this devotional service is actually an unnecessary disturbance in society. So, and this happens because of misunderstanding the Bhagavatam and misunderstanding the great scriptures, that people are misled like this. But by reading this book, Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur's book, one can very easily understand this science. So, text 37, in Chaitanya Mangal, later known as Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur has given the conclusion and essence of devotional service by quoting the authoritative statements of Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is why that he has quoted in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, he has quoted he's given the conclusion and the essence in the Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. So by reading this book, it's easy for the common man to understand all about devotional service and therefore not create an unnecessary disturbance in society. Okay, I will stop here, and if there is anything anyone would like to mention or discuss now, any questions or any comments, we can do that now. Yeah, up till 44 it does. Yeah. Okay, I think so. Okay, so right, let's continue on actually then. So right, okay, so text 37 is what we covered. And again, I'll actually go back to that because, so we were told up till now that people can misunderstand the Srimad Bhagavatam because it is elaborate. And now that in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, all the main points is quoted in the Chaitanya Bhagavat. Therefore, it is simple and easy to understand. It's not too elaborate. And therefore, it will allow us to understand Krishna, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and all about devotional service. So going back to this verse here today, see that last word sakala. Sakala means everything. So that everything that is important is going to be covered in this Chaitanya Bhagavat. 38 is if even a great atheist hears Chaitanya Mangal, he immediately becomes a great devotee. The subject matter of this book is so sublime that it appears that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has personally spoken through the writings of Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur. Okay. The subject matter of this book is so sublime that it appears that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has personally spoken. And then we'll read the purport of this verse actually, is that Sri Sanatana Goswami has written in his Hari Bhakti Vilas, Ai Vaishnava Mukha Girnam Putam Hari Kathamritam Shravnam Naiva Kartavyam Sarpo Chistam Yatha Payaha. Transcendental literature that strictly follows the Vedic principles and the conclusion of the Puranas and the Pancharatrika Vidhi can be written only by a pure devotee. It is not possible for a common man to write books on bhakti, for his writings will not be effective. He may be a very great scholar and expert in presenting literature in flowery language, but this is not at all helpful in understanding transcendental literature. Even if transcendental literature is written in faulty language, it is acceptable if it is written by a devotee, whereas so-called transcendental literature written by a mundane scholar, even if it is a very highly polished literary presentation, cannot be accepted. The secret in a devotee's writing is that when he writes about the pastimes of the Lord helps him. He does not write himself. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tvam Yena Mam Upyantite. Bhagavad Gita 10:10. Since a devotee writes in service to the Lord from within gives him so much intelligence that he sits down near the Lord and goes on writing books. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami confirms that what Vrindavan Das Thakur wrote was actually spoken by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he simply repeated it. The same holds true for Caitanya Caritamrita. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wrote Caitanya Caritamrita in his old age, in an invalid condition, but it is such a sublime literature that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj used to say, "The time will come when the people of the world will learn Bengali to read Sri Caitanya Caritamrita." We are trying to present Sri Caitanya Caritamrita in English and do not know how successful it will be. But if one reads the original Caitanya Caritamrita in Bengali, he will relish increasing ecstasy in devotional service. So this purport is by Srila Prabhupada, and we can see what Srila Prabhupada is saying, that he is presenting this Caitanya Caritamrita in English now, but if one reads in Bengali, then there will be increasing ecstasy in devotional service, and that there is actually Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, he used to say this, that the time will come when the people of the world will learn Bengali to read Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. So a couple of points from this purport is that even if one is very polished and able to speak and able to write in great language, if he is not a devotee, then it's not to be accepted, even though he may be attempting transcendental literature. But if a devotee writes, then it is accepted, even if the English or the words aren't that elaborate and flowery, it is accepted because it is written with devotion. And that the secret is that it's not the devotee who's writing it, but it is that when a devotee writes, the Lord helps him. He does not write himself. And it's described that he sits close to the Lord. The Lord sits close to him, and the Lord writes it. So the Lord gives him so much intelligence that he sits down near the Lord and goes on writing books. Okay, I'll stop here, and this reminds me of a little story which I'll just say very quickly now. It's a really interesting story that one time there was a Brahmin, and he was translating the Bhagavad Gita, and when he came to the part where it said that the Lord comes and says that I personally carry what you lack, then he thought, no, the Lord has so many servants and so many energies, surely the Lord wouldn't come personally to do that. So he actually crossed off that line, and then he went to have a bath in the river. And when he came back, he didn't go to have a bath. He went begging for the day. He went to collect alms for the day. And that day was a terrible day for him. He wasn't able to gather anything in charity. And meanwhile, what had happened is, when he came back home, his wife was waiting at the door, and she was really angry with him. She was waiting, like almost ready to bash him up. And then he said, what happened? And because he'd already had a really bad day, not been able to collect any alms. So then she said, what is this about you that I don't know? How come I didn't know this side of you, that I didn't know this side of you existed? How could you beat up a little boy like that? And I didn't even know you had a boy as a servant. So I don't know anything about this side of your life. And, then she was angry. So what had happened is, while he was away through the day, a little boy had come with some food stuff, with some bhoga, and given it to the wife and said, your husband has sent me with this. And then she said, but who are you? Oh, I'm his servant, this little boy had said. And as he bent down to put the food stuff on the ground, she saw on his back all these marks, as though he'd been hit by a stick, all these scratch marks she saw on his back. And then she said, oh my goodness, who's done this to you? And then he said, my master isn't very nice or very good or something like that. And basically said, your husband did it. And then she said, oh, come to the kitchen, let me feed you and everything. So when the husband came back home, this Brahmin, she took him to the kitchen and said, look, here he is. I've tried to feed him, and you didn't look after your little servant nicely. And she couldn't find him there anymore. And the husband the husband was rather confused. Then he went back to writing, and when he went back, he saw that the line that he had crossed out that morning was written again and written fresh. So then he understood completely that this was actually Krishna who had come. And how could I doubt that Krishna personally, that whatever is written in the Bhagavad Gita is each and every word is actually true. And Krishna is saying he personally comes to protect his devotees, to carry what they lack, that he personally comes. It's not that he doesn't come, and I shouldn't speculate like this. So then he understood that he had personally, that he had hurt Krishna like that by scratching out those words. So yeah, okay. Would anybody like to comment or question? Thank you very much for that excellent question. How do you recognize who is a devotee and who is not a devotee? So in the Bhagavad Gita, from in chapter 10, from text 8 onwards, it is described really nicely. And so chapter 10, text 8 onwards, and it is said that a devotee is one who is always thinking about Krishna, who is always speaking about Krishna, who has given up his whole heart to serve the Lord. And it is not external dress. It is also described in the scriptures that it is the activities and the words. So thinking about Krishna, speaking about Krishna, and given his heart to Krishna. And in this Caitanya Caritamrita early on, it was explained that that somebody you can know if they're a devotee or not is by their activities. So yeah, like that basically. So if it is confusing because we shouldn't be judging a book by its cover, and at the same time we don't want to be cheated at all. So yeah. Okay. So we shouldn't really be judging externally. So sometimes we think, he's dressed very properly, tilak and big beads and in the proper clothes, and very commonly the dress makes a man, and people get cheated like this, but actually it's the activities of a person. So just from the Bhagavad Gita, from 10:8, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who know this perfectly engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So we need to be seeing that a devotee is one who is doing devotional service and worshipping Krishna with all their hearts, 10.9 is the thoughts of my pure devotee. So who is a pure devotee? Dwells in me, they think about me, their lives are fully devoted to my service. They get great satisfaction and bliss from always talking about me to one another. Those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So it is the activities. And one who is engaging in devotional service, and one who is actually satisfied and happy, blissful in devotional service. Anything to add there, Prabhu? Okay. Anyone else would like to say anything? No? So I want to say something, is that, by reading this, it's really opened up like a whole new realm of all the associates of Lord Chaitanya, and who these associates are. In the bhajan that I sang this morning before we, right in the there's Narottam Das Thakur, there's Ramachandra, there's all these other associates, and by reading about these personalities, we are actually associating with them. And these are the personalities that were very close to Lord Chaitanya, who've written about him. So, it's given me great inspiration. Not just now, but early on also when I came across this initially, to just get to know these personalities well and try to follow in their footsteps. And it's all about relationships in the Caitanya Caritamrita, and by actually understanding these exchanges that are happening between these great devotees, we can see how devotional life is meant to be, how spiritual life and spiritual relationships are meant to be. So that was one little realization. And Prabhu?
On the point of these verses on the Chaitanya Bhagavatam, you speak very strongly recommending the readers.
Yeah.
And if you, at the very end of Chaitanya Caritamrita, you almost orders these readers to read Chaitanya Bhagavatam, so you sort of help to read it.
Yeah.
And I was going to just suggest, if you are going to read it, you can get the 7-volume set. You can buy it online, and it's originally in Bengali, with the commentary by Srila Bhaktivedanta in Bengali. It's been translated by Prabhupada disciples into English. It's very, very sweet, because normally Srila Bhaktivedanta in English is quite astute when he's speaking back in English, but his Bengali is very sweet, a bit more simple. When it translates to English, it's just like reading Srila Prabhupada's purport, it's very nice to read. And I highly recommend, if you're going to read the Chaitanya Bhagavatam, read some commentaries with it as well, rather than just read the translations.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for that great instruction. Okay. We'll stop here now, I guess, unless anyone else would like to say anything. Okay. Thank you very much for being here. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Caitanya Caritamrita ki Jai.